You're standing in the Louvre, staring at the most famous statue in human history, and you suddenly realize that everything you've been told about masculinity is a complete lie. The ancient Greeks, the same people who gave us democracy, philosophy, and the Olympics, would look at modern men's obsession with size and literally laugh their toga-wearing asses off. Because here's what will absolutely blow your mind. In ancient Greece, having a big penis wasn't just embarrassing, it was social suicide. We're talking about a civilization that carved their gods, heroes, and perfect men with deliberately small penises. Not because they were shy, not because they didn't understand anatomy, not because marble was expensive, but because they genuinely believed that big penises were signs of stupidity, barbarism, and complete lack of self-control. You think you understand what makes a real man? You think modern culture has figured out masculinity? Well, buckle up, because the Greeks, the same people who produced Alexander the Great, Socrates, and Aristotle, are about to completely destroy everything you thought you knew about what's hanging between your legs. And trust me, after you hear this story, you'll never look at ancient statues the same way again. In fact, you might start feeling pretty damn good about those so-called Greek god proportions. But here's the really insane part that's going to mess with your head. This wasn't just some weird artistic choice or religious prudishness. The Greeks had an entire philosophical system, backed by medicine, politics, and social customs, that declared small penises superior to large ones. They built their entire concept of the ideal man around this belief. And when I tell you why they thought this way, you're going to realize just how completely arbitrary every beauty standard you've ever believed actually is. To understand just how completely backwards this sounds to modern ears, you need to picture what ancient Greek society was actually like. These weren't prudish, covered-up people hiding from nudity, like some medieval monks. Greek men lived naked, and I mean really, truly, constantly naked, in ways that would make modern gyms seem modest. The word gymnasium literally comes from the Greek word gymnos, which means naked. These weren't places where you worked out in shorts and a t-shirt. Athletes trained completely nude, competed completely nude, and socialized completely nude. Men bathed together in public bathhouses, soldiers drilled without clothing, and even some religious ceremonies required full nudity. Being naked around other men wasn't just normal. It was mandatory for anyone who wanted to be considered a proper citizen. So when I tell you these guys saw each other's equipment all the time, I'm not exaggerating. They weren't guessing about sizes. They weren't wondering who was packing what. They weren't relying on rumors or locker room bragging. They knew exactly what everyone was working with because they saw it every single day. There was zero mystery about penis size in ancient Greece. And yet, and this is where it gets absolutely mind-boggling, when these same people decided to create the perfect human form in marble, when they carved their gods and heroes for all eternity, when they wanted to show the world what the ideal man looked like, they consistently, deliberately, intentionally chose to make penises small. We're talking about the Parthenon builders, the mathematics inventors, the theater creators. These weren't unsophisticated cave people. They were the smartest, most advanced civilization of their time. The most famous statues in human history, Michelangelo's David, the Discobolus, statues of Zeus, Apollo, Hermes, they all have what modern guys would consider completely inadequate equipment. But here's what's going to fry your brain. This wasn't artistic modesty, religious censorship, or technical limitations. This was their actual, genuine, deeply held belief about what male perfection looked like. Here's where it gets absolutely insane, and I mean completely, totally, mind-meltingly crazy. The Greeks didn't just randomly decide small penises were better. They had an entire philosophical system built around penis size that was the complete opposite of everything we believe today. And when you hear their reasoning, you'll realize they actually put way more thought into this than we've ever put into our modern size obsession. The Greeks divided all men into two fundamental categories: civilized humans and barely controlled animals. And they believed your penis size determined which category you fell into. This wasn't just locker room talk or casual opinion. This was serious philosophy, debated by the same people who invented logic and rational thinking. Small penis equals civilized gentleman. According to Greek thinking, a man with a small penis was a man who could control his sexual urges, focus on important things like philosophy and mathematics, lead armies through strategy rather than rage, and make rational decisions under pressure. It was literally a visible sign that you had evolved beyond your animal instincts and could think with your brain instead of your crotch. But large penis? That equals walking disaster. Greeks believed that guys with big penises were basically human animals who were slaves to their sexual desires. They thought these men were incapable of rational thought, couldn't be trusted in important situations, and would always make terrible decisions because they were controlled by lust instead of logic. Having a big penis was like wearing a neon sign that said, "I make life choices based on where my blood flow is going." This wasn't just abstract theory that philosophers debated in their spare time. Greeks applied this logic to every aspect of their society. In Greek theater, and remember, theater was serious business, not just entertainment, the villains and comic relief characters were always given massive, exaggerated fake phalluses. The message was crystal clear to everyone watching. Big penis equals big problems, stupidity, and moral corruption. Even their religion followed this rule. And this is where it gets really wild. Priapus, the god who was cursed with a permanently erect, enormous penis, wasn't worshipped as some alpha male sex deity. He was considered a joke, a minor god that people laughed at and made fun of. Meanwhile, Zeus, the king of all gods, Apollo, Poseidon, and every other major deity were always portrayed with modest, controlled proportions. The Greeks literally believed their most powerful, wisest, most divine beings had small penises, and that this modest size was actually what made them superior beings worthy of worship. Now here's where Greek society gets so bizarre. It sounds like a comedy sketch written by someone who completely hates modern masculinity. These people took their small penis obsession and applied it to every single aspect of daily life, creating situations that would make modern men question the nature of reality itself. In the gymnasiums where young men trained naked every day, having a large penis was absolutely mortifying. We're not talking about mild locker room awkwardness that you laugh off later. We're talking about genuine social disgrace that could ruin your reputation permanently. Some athletes actually practice something called infibulation, which means they tied their foreskins shut with leather strings to make their penises appear even smaller during competitions. Let that sink in. These guys were so ashamed of being well endowed that they literally tied their penises shut before working out. That's the level of complete backwards insanity we're dealing with here. Greek artists developed specific professional techniques to minimize male genitalia in their sculptures, and this was taught in art schools like any other technical skill. The rule was always the same, and never varied. The more heroic the figure, the smaller his penis should be carved. It was like reverse Photoshop, except instead of enhancing and enlarging, they were deliberately shrinking and reducing. Master sculptors spent years perfecting techniques for making penises look as small as possible, while still being anatomically realistic. The medical field was equally completely insane about this. Greek doctors, the same people who developed early surgery and understood human anatomy better than anyone else in the ancient world, believed that large penises were caused by excess bodily heat and needed to be treated like a serious medical condition. They prescribed cold baths, special diets full of cooling foods, and specific exercises designed to reduce penis size. Imagine going to your doctor today and having him prescribe ice baths and celery smoothies because you're too well hung. These people literally turned being blessed into a medical emergency requiring immediate treatment. Political leaders with large penises became targets of public mockery in ways that would destroy careers permanently. Greek comedy writers, who were like the late-night talk show hosts of their time, would make jokes about politicians' oversized equipment as a way to question their fitness for office. It was considered solid evidence of poor character and lack of the self-discipline necessary for leadership. In a culture where public speaking and rational debate determined who got to make important decisions, being known for having a big penis was absolute political suicide. This completely backwards beauty standard created a society where men actively, desperately tried to shrink their penises, using methods that sound like medieval torture devices, but were actually considered normal grooming routines that every respectable man practiced regularly. The kynodesme was basically ancient Greek Spanx specifically designed for penises, and it was as uncomfortable as it sounds. This leather strap system pulled the foreskin forward and tied it shut, creating the visual appearance of an even smaller penis than nature had provided. Athletes wore these things regularly during training and competitions, and they were sold in marketplaces right next to sandals and olive oil like any other piece of essential sporting equipment. Imagine doing your weekly shopping and casually picking up a penis-shrinking device because you had gymnasium class later that afternoon. Greek families arranged marriages based on genital size, but in exactly the opposite way you'd expect in any sane society. Fathers actively preferred sons-in-law with smaller penises because they were considered more reliable husbands, less likely to cheat with other women, and better able to provide intellectual companionship to their daughters rather than just physical satisfaction. Wedding negotiations included discreet but serious inquiries about the potential groom's proportions, and smaller sizes actually commanded higher dowries from the bride's family. They literally created a marriage economy where being less endowed made you more valuable as a husband and son-in-law. The practice of pederasty, older men mentoring younger men in relationships that often included sexual components, also followed this twisted logic completely. Young men with smaller genitals were considered more suitable students because they were supposedly less distracted by their own sexual urges and more capable of focusing on learning philosophy, mathematics, and proper behavior. It was like a scholarship system based entirely on penis size, except smaller meant you were more likely to get accepted into the best educational programs. Even military service was affected by this insanity in ways that would make modern armies question everything. Greek soldiers with large penises were sometimes assigned to less prestigious units because commanders genuinely believed they were more likely to be distracted by thoughts of sex during crucial battles. The elite Sacred Band of Thebes, one of the most feared and effective military units in ancient history, was rumored to select soldiers partly based on their modest proportions. They turned penis size into an actual military qualification system, and bigger definitely, absolutely wasn't better for your career prospects. So what the hell happened? How did we go from a civilization that literally worshipped small penises and built temples celebrating modest proportions to a modern culture that's completely, utterly obsessed with size in the opposite direction? The answer reveals just how arbitrary, meaningless, and ridiculous every beauty standard throughout human history really is. And it should make every modern man seriously question what we've been taught about masculinity. The decline of Greek philosophical culture marked the beginning of the end for small penis appreciation, and it happened gradually over several centuries. As Greek culture was conquered and absorbed by the more practical, military-focused Romans, philosophical ideals about self-control and rational thinking were replaced by values that prioritized physical power and military conquest. Romans cared way more about winning wars than contemplating the nature of existence, and they began associating physical size with military effectiveness. Bigger started meaning stronger, and stronger meant better at the only thing Romans really cared about: dominating their enemies. Christianity further completely distorted the original Greek ideals by introducing sexual shame and guilt that made all open discussions of genitalia absolutely taboo. Instead of openly debating the philosophical merits of different penis sizes like Greeks did in public forums, Christian culture pushed all sexuality underground, where size became a secret, shameful obsession instead of a legitimate topic for intellectual discussion. Modern pornography and media completed the total transformation by turning male insecurity into an incredibly profitable industry worth billions of dollars. The exact same psychological mechanisms that made ancient Greeks ashamed and embarrassed about having large penises now make modern men ashamed and embarrassed about having small ones. It's literally the exact same insecurity and self-doubt, just flipped completely backwards and marketed differently. But here's the absolutely mind-bending reality that should change how you think about everything. The Greeks weren't wrong, and neither are we. Both cultures created elaborate, sophisticated justifications for completely arbitrary, meaningless preferences that have nothing to do with actual human worth or capability. Greeks convinced themselves that small penises indicated superior intelligence and self-control. We've convinced ourselves that large penises indicate confidence and sexual prowess. Both beliefs are equally ridiculous and equally meaningless when you step back and look at them objectively. The ancient Greeks would look at our modern obsession with penis size exactly the same way we look at their small penis worship, as completely crazy and totally missing the point of what actually makes someone a good person, effective leader, or desirable partner. The only real difference is that they built beautiful temples and carved magnificent statues to celebrate their arbitrary standard, while we just created billion-dollar industries designed to sell insecurity and self-doubt about ours.